Mr. Walter Eaton, a hidden millionaire in his 60s, decided to put his disguise plan into action. Walter owned a group of businesses under the Eaton Enterprises name, but no one would recognize him on the streets. He had always kept his face hidden from the public eye, letting his son, Calvin, serve as the face of the company. This worked out well. Calvin was smart, driven, and had a knack for public relations that helped the family empire grow. Walter, however, had heard troubling whispers about one of his restaurants, Eaton's Eats, located in a small but busy neighborhood. Some employees hinted that the manager, a woman named Jenna Rowe, didn't treat people fairly, especially those who seemed poor. Walter thought to himself, I need to see this with my own eyes. So, he put on ragged clothes, smudged dirt on his face, and went out looking like a man who hadn't showered in weeks. Standing outside the restaurant, Walter felt a mix of nerves and curiosity. He approached the door slowly, leaning heavily on a wooden cane he borrowed for the act. Inside, Jenna stood behind the counter, talking loudly to one of the servers. Her tone was sharp, her words impatient. Walter took a deep breath and opened the door. The second he stepped in, Jenna's eyes narrowed as she watched him. Walter shuffled over to the counter and asked in a soft voice, "Ma'am, could I please get a bit of food? I haven't eaten in a while." Jenna's expression twisted. "We don't hand out free meals here, old man," she snapped, rolling her eyes. Some customers turned to look at Walter, their faces mixed with pity and discomfort. Walter held his ground, hoping for a bit of kindness, but Jenna's attitude only worsened. "Look," she said loudly, so everyone could hear. "We run a business here, not a charity. If you can't pay, you need to leave." Walter tried one more time, quietly asking, "Even a small piece of bread, ma'am?" But Jenna wasn't having it. She leaned over the counter, raising her voice even louder. "I told you, we don't serve beggars here. I'm calling the cops if you don't leave right now." Walter stood frozen, stunned by her lack of empathy. Jenna's words grew colder as she picked up the phone to dial. Other employees watched, but no one dared to speak up. Walter saw their discomfort, but also their fear. She really rules with an iron fist, he thought. Just then, 2 police officers arrived. Jenna greeted them with an exaggerated story, describing Walter as a disturbance and a threat to her customers. The officers approached Walter, firm but polite, asking him to leave the restaurant. Walter nodded but felt a twinge of disappointment. He had hoped to see the best in people, yet Jenna had shown him the worst. As he slowly moved toward the door, a familiar face appeared, his son, Calvin. Calvin hadn't expected to find his father here, dressed in rags and looking like a man who had lost everything. The moment he saw the police trying to escort his father out, he hurried over, his brows furrowed in concern. "Sir, what's going on here?" Calvin asked, directing his question to the officers. They looked confused, then glanced at Jenna, who crossed her arms and glared. "This man was causing a disturbance," she insisted, her voice cold and dismissive. Calvin turned to Walter, silently asking if everything was all right. Walter nodded but gestured for Calvin to hold his questions for now. But Calvin wouldn't let it go. He looked at Jenna, his gaze piercing. "And did he ask for anything?" Calvin questioned. Jenna rolled her eyes. "Yeah, a handout, like some freeloader. He doesn't belong here." Calvin clenched his jaw, glancing around at the uncomfortable customers and staff. Then he turned back to the officers. "This man you're trying to escort out, he's my father." The room went silent. Jenna's face paled as the weight of Calvin's words sank in. Her sneer vanished, replaced with shock and fear. Walter finally spoke, his voice calm but filled with disappointment. "So, this is how you treat those who come here with nothing?" The restaurant fell into a thick, tense silence. Jenna's jaw dropped, her face paling as she processed what Calvin had just said. The man she just humiliated was no ordinary, homeless person, he was her boss. Even worse, the man in front of her, Calvin, wasn't just any customer, he was the face of Eaton Enterprises. Calvin's calm expression never wavered. He turned to the officers, giving them a polite nod. "Thank you for responding so quickly, officers. You're free to go now," he said, his voice steady. The officers exchanged glances, confused but understanding it wasn't a situation that needed further intervention. They left quietly, leaving the restaurant in an awkward stillness. Jenna's hands trembled as she tried to regain her composure. Her mind raced, searching for a way to fix the mess she just created. She forced a nervous smile and stammered, "I didn't know. I had no idea. Mr. Eaton, I didn't recognize you." Walter gave her a long, disappointed look. He didn't raise his voice or make a scene. Instead, he simply said, "Jenna, when you look at someone who has nothing, you should remember they could be someone with a story you don't understand. A person's worth doesn't depend on the clothes they wear." Jenna's face flushed, and she looked down, unable to meet Walter's gaze. The restaurant staff watched, some clearly relieved that Jenna was finally getting a taste of her own medicine. They had witnessed her arrogance countless times, but had never dared to speak up. Calvin glanced at his father, then looked directly at Jenna. "How long have you been managing this location, Jenna?" he asked, his tone firm. He already knew the answer but wanted her to say it. About 2 years, sir," Jenna replied, her voice shaking. 2 years? Calvin echoed, his eyes narrowing. "And in those 2 years you never thought that maybe the way you treat people matters just as much as how well you run the business?" Jenna stammered again. "I thought I was doing what was best. We get a lot of people asking for handouts, and I was trying to keep the place in order." Calvin crossed his arms, unimpressed. "By treating someone with complete disrespect? By calling the police on someone who simply asked for a piece of bread?" His words struck Jenna like a hammer, and she shifted uncomfortably, her face flushing with shame. Walter took a step closer, his voice calm but firm. "When I came in here today, Jenna, I hoped to see a team that cared about people. I wanted to know that those who work for me don't just care about money and profits but also about humanity." He paused, looking around at the other employees. "This restaurant, this company, exists because of people. People who trust us. And I won't tolerate anyone, especially a manager, who forgets that." One of the servers, a young man named Andy, who had been silently watching, finally spoke up, his voice timid but clear. "Mr. Eaton, if I may. Jenna has treated a lot of people like that. Customers, delivery workers, even us. We didn't know how to tell you." His words hung in the air, a truth everyone else was too afraid to voice. Calvin nodded, acknowledging Andy's courage. "Thank you, Andy. It takes bravery to speak up, and I want you all to know that you can always come to us if there's a problem." Jenna took a shaky breath, her voice barely a whisper. I can change. I'll make it right. Just give me another chance. I didn't mean any harm." Walter considered her words carefully, then shook his head slowly. "Jenna, actions speak louder than words. If you had shown any kindness, any compassion, even once, I would consider it. But you chose to treat others as if they were beneath you, simply because they looked different." Jenna opened her mouth to protest, but Calvin raised a hand, silencing her. "Effective immediately, you're dismissed, Jenna. We'll be in touch regarding the formalities. But for now, I suggest you leave." Jenna's shoulders slumped, and she cast one last look around the room before hurrying out the door, her face a mixture of anger and regret. Walter watched her go, feeling a strange sense of both sadness and relief. He didn't take pleasure in firing anyone, but he knew that keeping Jenna in her role would only harm the business and the people. Once she was gone, Walter turned to the remaining employees, his expression softening. "I apologize to each of you," he said sincerely. "I let someone into this business who didn't care about people. And for that, I'm sorry." The staff members exchanged surprised glances. Andy, encouraged by Walter's sincerity, spoke up again. "Thank you, Mr. Eaton. It means a lot to hear you say that." Walter nodded. "I'm going to make things right, starting with the team here. If any of you ever feel uncomfortable, disrespected, or mistreated, please know that my door is open. I want you all to be proud to work here, and that starts with respect." As the restaurant settled back into its usual rhythm, Walter felt a sense of relief. He knew that he made the right decision, not just for the business but for the people who helped it thrive. A week after Jenna's departure, the restaurant felt like a different place. Walter and Calvin returned, this time in formal business attire, ready to meet the team properly. Every staff member was eager to see them, feeling an unusual excitement. There was no more tension, no more whispered complaints, just a shared sense of relief and anticipation. Walter gathered the team in the dining area for a brief meeting. He looked around at each of them, a gentle smile on his face. "First, I want to thank each of you for your dedication and patience. I understand things haven't been easy, but I want you all to know that you're valued here. You are the heart and soul of this place, and we want you to feel appreciated." Calvin took a step forward, his gaze warm and reassuring. "We've decided to make some changes, starting with a policy on respect and kindness. Our goal is to create an environment where everyone, from our guests to each of you, feels valued." The employees exchanged nods, their faces lighting up with relief and happiness. Walter glanced at Andy, the young server who had bravely spoken up that day. "Andy, I owe you a special thanks," Walter said. "Your honesty was courageous, and it reminded me why we're all here, to make this place better together." Andy's face turned red, but he managed a grateful smile. "Thank you, Mr. Eaton. I wanted to help." Walter nodded, placing a reassuring hand on Andy's shoulder. "You did help more than you know." The changes at the restaurant didn't stop with policies alone. Walter implemented regular team meetings, providing a space where everyone could voice concerns, offer suggestions, and be heard. New training sessions focused not only on skill but also on empathy and understanding. The positive shift was felt by the customers, too. Word quickly spread about the restaurant's warm, welcoming atmosphere. Business boomed, and the employees felt proud to work there. Walter visited more often, enjoying meals with his team, listening to their stories, and reminding them that they weren't just employees, they were family. A month later, as Walter and Calvin sat together watching the team at work, Walter smiled and said, "Sometimes you have to step out of the shadows to remind people what matters most. I learned as much from them as they did from me." Calvin nodded, his pride in his father evident. "You showed us that it's not just about business, Dad. It's about people." Walter simply smiled, feeling a deep sense of contentment. The restaurant was thriving, not because of policies or profits, but because it was a place where everyone felt valued, respected, and part of something meaningful. And for Walter Eaton, that was the true mark of success. This brings us to the end of this story. Thank you for watching the video to the end. Kindly subscribe for more thrilling stories. Like and share this video. Have a nice day.